Hi, Randall. Great to meet you. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Nice to meet you too.
Such an interesting topic, and I want to ask about the fifth edition of this book. I want to also, well, I want to start with Tom Petty because he writes that foreword, an honest foreword in the book, and he obviously thought very highly of you. He talks about how he didn't own the copyrights to his first few records, but if he had known you or had a book like this, things might have been different. Can you talk about how you met Tom and the story of the $125,000 error made by MCA Records that led to your working relationship with him?
Yeah. Geez, there's a lot there. The early in my career, I ended up working for a business manager named Bernie Goodby. Someone told him that I was good with numbers and could go over royalty statements and look at stuff. So Bernie threw me in a room with I guess at that point was considered a laptop. It was about the size of 4 bowling balls. It was a compact 64, I think, and you carried it like a suitcase. And he sat me in a room with that, Tom's royalty statements, and Tom's recording agreement, and said, just go through them, see if you can figure out where the numbers came from and whether they look good to you or not. And so I set to it. And the first thing, first statement I looked at, I saw there was a charge for $125,000 for an advance. So I went over to the general ledger that they had for Tom. And I looked and I said, yep, there's 125 received, all good. I made sure the royalty rates were right. And then I finished that statement, went on to the next one. And the first thing I saw on the next one was a $125,000 advance. And I said, geez, did we get two? I went to the general ledger and no, we didn't. So I called MCA and said, hey, it looks like you charged us twice for the same advance. And they said, oh, we're sorry. It was an honest mistake. They messengered over a check. I told Tom about it. It was a hell of a lot of money for him at the time. And he sent over a copy of Damn the Torpedoes signed to me saying, count every penny, Randall. Love, Tom.
And thus began the relationship with Tom.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. What inspired you to write the book initially? I'm imagining it is stories like that, to help these artists. And what led to the fifth edition that just recently came out?
Well, what led me to write the book initially was I was invited to go see a parade, the Rose Parade at the a publicist's office in Pasadena. And he was saying, I could blow your company up through the world if you wrote a book about music publishing. We could get you to be the one that everybody wants to interview and everybody wants to talk to. And I said, okay, so when do I have to have it done by? And he says, a week would do. So I had the time off because of the holidays. So I sat down and wrote 10 hours a day. He thought it was just a joke. And after a week, I said, okay, it's done. Now what? Yeah. I said, well, we got to find a publisher. And we did. The fifth edition came about because there's so much that has changed in the last 2 or 3 years. I really didn't want to be in the position of doing a fifth edition because it's so much work to make this many changes and talk about so many new topics. But I sat down and did it, and Jason Riss in my office provided a lot of suggestions on things like the MLC and the CRB hearings and streaming. So he made sure I got a lot of that stuff right.
Well,
So,
streaming's the big one. That's the one that anybody who's a music fan is clearly aware of. I guess you could say the controversy or just the topic itself is interesting. Not a lot of people know about it, so I wanted to ask you about that a little more specifically. What exactly is music publishing? Why is it so important?
Well, music publishing is a bit of a misnomer. It has very little to do with printing sheet music and publishing it in book form. It's more managing intellectual property. Uh, if you own an office building, you collect the rent on a regular basis from your tenants. Likewise, if you own songs, people who use the songs have to pay for the use of the songs. And that's what music publishers do. They make sure no one's squatting in the offices, which is, the analogy would be an infringement of, the song. This morning, we just discovered apparently, there's a commercial by a major cell phone company that uses one of our clients' copyrighted material. So, I mean, a music publisher defends it. A music publisher also will, be contacted by legitimate people that are wanting to use the song, negotiate rights, paperwork it, collect the money, pay the songwriters. Uh, it's not very glamorous. It's very technical, uh, but writers should care about it tremendously because songs live much longer than your 10 weeks on the charts. One of the songs we control is Santa Claus is Coming to Town. It has a couple more years of copyright left on it. And that song throws off huge amounts of money every holiday season and throughout the year. We have Que Sera Sera from the Alfred Hitchcock film 1956, I think. And these songs have certain songs have a lifetime that well exceeds the time that they were on the hit parade, so to speak. And, if they're well managed, they can keep you alive forever if you're a writer.
So does somebody right now currently own the rights to Santa Claus is Coming to Town, and then somebody else is going to try to to outbid somebody else to get it? How does that all work?
Our clients are the Coots family, J. Fred Coots, who was one of the writers of the song. And, the heirs of Fred Coots own it, and they'll own it until it goes into the public domain.
Yeah, that's the other thing. The public domain is interesting too. And then there are traditional songs. What is a traditional song? That's when they
Uh,
don't know who wrote it?
A traditional song is one that has gone into the public domain. Maybe the writer is known, maybe the writer is not known. But what ends up happening is, uh, no one owns the copyright to it per se. However, there can be traditional songs that have new material and new arrangements made. Like Neil Young did an album called Americana, and he did a bunch of songs, you know, Oh Susanna, but in America the Beautiful. So, My Country 'Tis of Thee. It was a weird album, but it was a great album. And we took it to a musicologist before it came out, and the musicologist determined, okay, Neil wrote a new melody here. He wrote a new verse on this one. He did this. So when you do a copyrighted arrangement, there are two components in the copyright. One is the non-claimed traditional public domain material. And then to continue the example, in Neil's case, the remainder of original material that he created and added to the public domain stuff is under copyright in Neil's favor and benefit.
Wow. Yeah, this podcast. I don't play any copyright music, and I had one before it that I did, and it was doing really well. And then I pulled the plug on it because episodes were getting pulled down. It was actually a lot of Beatles episodes, And a lot of people said, why aren't you doing that anymore? I said, well, I spoke with an attorney. He's a professor in copyright law. And I said, I don't play the whole song, but I play this is, I'm sure you've heard this a million times. Oh, I just, 30 seconds of the song. There's a whole, like these made up rules that are okay, and they're not. And it's a defense. It's not anything you can block anybody from suing you. And he said, yeah, just don't even bother. It's just not worth it, because if you do start to get popular enough and you hit their radar, then it's not something that you're going to really want to fight, because it's going to be expensive to fight. And even if you did win, it's not going to be worth it, because again, you're going to be paying all these expenses for lawyers. Does that
Yeah,
sound about right? I
it
made the right
sounds
call.
right. To just bring a little bit more nuance to what you're saying, uh, there is a concept called fair use. And fair use is basically the US government's attempt to not stifle free speech. And there are certain things where you can use copyrighted material uh, for free without getting permission with a fair use defense. So let's say you're a college professor and you're writing a book about lyrics that oppose the Vietnam War, and supposing you wanted to quote Neil Young's song "Ohio," the lyrics in at the Democratic Convention, in the context of a scholarly analysis of the period. And then you might make a fair use defense of your book. There are, I think, four criteria that judges can use to determine whether that professor's use was fair use or not. However, as you mentioned, there's the cost of, if someone says we don't think it's a fair use and they take you to court, you could be in, you know, legal fee hell for the rest of your life. Likewise, if the court agrees with you, okay, great, you didn't have to pay for it, but you spent a lot of money, so it's sort of like a game of chicken to determine whether something was fair use or not.
And it is correct, like if you hit their radar, because a lot of podcasts do play music clips of songs, and they seem to be fine. But I think it's if you start to get popular enough, it might hit the radar of those who have the rights to those songs, or no.
I one of the four criteria I think is the purpose of the use. Is it for scholarly or critical purposes, or is it to make a profit for your podcast? And you can look up what the criteria are for a fair use defense, and you can get a lawyer to weigh in on whether or not your podcast is or isn't. I mean, if the university professor is doing it on a non-paid basis, reading his book or something, versus charging $25 an episode to listen to him, that all factors into it. So,
Mm,
I mean,
yeah,
basically, it is a use of copyrighted material, and it is an infringement, uh, you know, to the extent that the fair use defense isn't
yeah.
upheld.
And then you get the people say, "Well, you're helping to promote their music. They should be thank you." Well, that may be, but you still need their permission. It's
Yeah,
still their decision to make.
yeah. I think in my book, I think I talk about an alleged story of Sophie Tucker, old vaudeville star from way back when. And someone said, you should do this show really cheap. It'll be great for your career. It'll be great exposure. And she turned to them and said, exposure, isn't that what you die from?
Yeah,
So,
that's a good line. Yeah,
yeah. So I mean, when people come to me and say, hey, it'll be great exposure for the Doors to let me use Light My Fire, they don't need your exposure.
They're doing just fine.
Yeah,
Yeah, even last night I was just telling you I went to see Sammy Hagar last night. I just filmed a couple minutes of it just to share with friends, and then I immediately put it onto like unlisted or private or whatever, just to share it with friends. But YouTube was on it right away, a copyright claim, which is cool. I don't
yeah,
care. I'm not looking to do anything with it other than share it with my friends because it takes up so much space on my phone. That was the only reason I did it. But
yeah.
yeah, I mean, it makes sense. What's the biggest mistake an artist can make if they're not careful about the songs they write?
In my opinion, it's giving away the publishing to a company or on a long-term basis. I mean, these are your babies, your kids to very some extent, unless you have a very callous attitude towards your own creations. And anything that's more than a short-term basis, I'd say 3 years, is a big risk. I mean, the companies that will give you money to part with your copyrights are professional bettors. They would go out, they're handicappers. They would go out of business if on the whole they lost every single bet. They might lose 2 or 3 out of 10, but the other seven pay for them. And they're handicapping your career thinking that they will make more than they are giving you. They're in business to do that. And so you're going up against a professional handicapper and betting against yourself. And that's, I think, the biggest mistake these people make.
I heard a story years ago, actually read it, and I printed it up and kept it for my radio days because I would mention it on the air. It was documented, so I'm assuming it's true. But Eddie Money was interviewed once, and they asked him, "Boy, you tour a lot. How come you're still out there? Do you do it because you love it?" He's like, "Well, yeah, I love it, but," he said, "I sold all the publishing to my songs to buy a home for my now ex-wife." Now, so I don't know if that's true, but basically what he's saying is now I make my income by touring. I don't, and what a shame if that's true, because he's
Yeah,
got
no,
songs
I
that
have no
still get
doubt
played.
that is true for many songwriters. I've
Yeah.
heard that story so many times, not necessarily from Eddie Money. I was very fortunate when we represented George Harrison to be invited to a very nice party that they held in Hollywood when they posthumously gave George a star on Vine Street on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. And, a lot of George's friends were there, Paul McCartney, uh, Tom Petty, Jeff Lynne. And in the party, I walked up to Paul, introduced myself to him, and I said, "Hey, I handle Harris songs for Olivia, and it's really nice to meet you." And he just immediately went into a rant about how George was the smart one. He was the one who didn't give all the songs to Northern Songs after a certain point. And it hit such a nerve so many years after the fact. Paul is never going to hurt for money, but it was still a very sensitive point, after all those years that his songs at that time weren't his.
Yeah. Olivia, by the way, is George's widow, right?
Yeah,
Olivia. Yeah. Wow. So, well, that story is famous with him and Michael Jackson too, about how Michael bought out the Beatles catalog like at the last minute. It's like a
yeah,
bidding
yeah,
war. Um,
yeah.
well,
No, I mean, don't mention Beatles publishing to him if you.
right. Well, so is that what's going on with Hall and Oates? Is that about selling the publishing? Is that I'm trying to figure out what's going on there based on the interviews with Oates. I don't know how much Daryl said about it.
Yeah, I know that both of them sold their publishing to the first version of Primary Wave before they called it quits, sold to BMG, and then they started Primary Wave number 2, I guess. Uh, we used to administer Primary Wave number 1, and we would do the back office for them. And there was no issues at that time. We just collected and paid. But from what little I've read now, they're fighting over additional rights and who gets to sell and who can't, and I
Yeah,
mean, I wouldn't have sold in the first place, so
you would not have. Yeah.
no.
Yeah. Well, and I wonder if this has to do with, and you bring this up in the book about you got to be careful who you sell it to, because like you could have a song and you use the example of Preparation H. It's like
Yeah,
they're giving you a ton of money. Well, that's great, but now our song is associated with hemorrhoids. And it's like, I don't know if I want that. And I think from what I'm gathering is like one of the two guys are saying, I want this, the decision making in the songs that we wrote together. I want to have a say in where they're going to end up. I don't want to, if it's in somebody else's hands, that's great that they paid us a ton of money, but they're going to be the ones that are going to they're going to make the call on that.
yeah. Well, I mean, Neil Young ended up selling his publishing, or half of his publishing, I guess, has been reported publicly, to Hypnosis. Well, Hypnosis is basically no longer, as I understand it, and has been sold to BlackRock. Well, that's a huge multinational investment vehicle that does investments in all sorts of things. And I mean, when I took a look at their website, it said they invest in quote unquote tactical opportunities. I mean, you figure out what that is. Is that weaponry? I don't know.
Right. Right.
But, I have no doubt that, Neil thought he was selling to Hypnosis and didn't know he might be with a company that was in tactical weaponry. Likewise, Jonathan Richman, we got a seemingly innocent request for him where he wanted to use, Sparkletts Water wanted to use one of his songs in some promotions, and he took one look at it and said, "Don't you know Sparkletts Water is owned by Foremost McKesson, and they make nuclear reactors, and I don't want to do it." So, and he turned down Nestle's chocolate commercials, Jonathan Richman, because they were involved in a dilution of baby formula scandal in Africa. And so, you think chocolate, you think water, you think a company that touts itself as being artist centric. You never know what you're getting as a partner in the long run.
So you want to be very protective of your music, which segs into the next question, which had to do with, or has to do with, Right Now from Van Halen in 1991. The story from Eddie was Pepsi came to him. We want to use Right Now to promote our new product, Crystal Pepsi. Eddie said no, and they said, well, they kind of strong armed him into it by saying, well, that's fine. We'll just record a generic version of it, and we'll go ahead and use it without you. Thanks. And he was like, whoa, wait a minute. Okay, if that's the case, then here you go, take it. So the question is like generic versions of songs. Like, would he have gotten paid just not as much if it was a bunch of random musicians recording his song?
Well, you get into a very important distinction in copyrights here, in that there are two sets of rights. There's the master recording right, and there's the song itself, the underlying composition. And if, to take Van Halen, if they record a Kinks song, Where Have All the Good Times Gone, the Kinks can determine, whoever owns the copyright, I think it's ABCO, in the, Kinks song, can decide whether or not to license the song, and at what terms. And if they go ahead and do it, in Van Halen's case, it might be Warner Brothers' decision onto whether or not they license the Van Halen master of that to a commercial, or whether someone just goes out and gets a different recording, maybe the Kinks recording, maybe studio musicians making it. And groups may or may not have approval rights over what their labels do with their master.
Well, it's like they did Roy Orbison's Pretty Woman, but they changed the title to Oh Pretty Woman.
Yeah.
Is that to get around some kind of legal issue, or is that just
I'm not
What the
familiar.
hell? So this tells me you know Van Halen very well because you chose a song instead of "You Really Got Me." You chose
Yeah,
the song from Diver Down. So thumbs up right there. I
yeah.
love it. Yeah, I've heard people use the term "Wild West" to describe the music business today. Thanks to streaming services and internet. Was there ever a time in rock history when it was like this? Like back in the '50s, I always thought maybe when rock music was just becoming a moneymaker, maybe it would have been similar because it was kind of the Wild West at that time, or no?
It was to a lesser extent, you know, freewheeling and Wild West way back when. What has happened is a lot of businesses and companies and services have come in to the current uh, world with a lot of startup money, billions and billions of dollars in revenue, and it's unfortunately cheaper for some of these people to use now, infringe now, and then resolve later after the fact. And when you get a company that has revenue in the billions and just is daring you to go ahead and sue us and come after us. Yeah, we're using hundreds of thousands of songs, from a catalog without a license. Um, but it's easier for them and cheaper and a good, often, depending on who you ask, a good business decision to just get to the market first, get your product or service out there first, and then resolve the people that come after you afterwards. Might be cheaper.
Yeah. Now, streaming services, before I get into the question is how much does an artist get for each stream? Just one last Van Halen mention here because it has to do with streaming services, which is their last album, 2012's A Different Kind of Truth, dropped off streaming services, was gone. And then there was a bit of war words between Wolfgang Van Halen and David Lee Roth over why it wasn't there. It's since come back. Who and what determines whether a song or album is on streaming services and for how long? Is it a contract deal?
Okay, the way you asked the question, I'm going to give you a specific answer. You said, who determines whether a song is on a streaming
Song
service?
or album?
Yeah,
Right.
a song is determined by the publisher, whether a publisher has a deal in place with a licensed streaming service. A recording is determined by the master. So, we have over 10,000 recordings of Santa Claus is Coming to Town on Spotify, and we've approved all of them. They're all fine to be up there. But there is the label side that the person who owns the person or company who owns the master recording can determine whether or not they want their master on Spotify. There's a Bruce Springsteen, a Michael Bublé, a Jackson 5. There's so many versions of Santa Claus is Coming to Town. And if Bruce Springsteen's label says to Spotify, you can't use Bruce's version on Spotify, even though we've given permission on the publishing side, they don't have to give it on the master side. So Spotify would use every single one that the labels have been approved and the publishers have been approved, but they wouldn't use the one that Springsteen's label declined, hypothetically.
Yeah, interesting. I just talked to an author of a book on Y&T, and I always like to put a playlist together and a link to it. And it was like half their songs aren't on Spotify. But that's because it's a band. You had many different labels, or not many different labels, but they had a smaller label in the beginning. So their first two albums, they're not there. And I think a lot of people wonder that, like, why isn't it there?
Yeah.
And that's the reason. How much do artists get paid per stream? And
Oh,
do you think
nothing.
it's fair? Right, that's what I hear. It's like 0.00009% of a penny or something.
Yeah,
And yeah,
it's in micro pennies. When we represented Journey, we had Don't Stop Believing, and one of the guys called me up and said, hey, guess what? We got 40 million streams on this. How much did I get? And I told him a very low number when I totaled it up. And uh, I mean, it was just a few $1,000s.
Oh my God.
And I said, well, they said, but it's 40 million. I said, no, that's not even a bump in the streaming world. You got to start, to make money, you got to be a few 100 million streams or, what I would consider money.
So do you see changes in the future being made on that? Are there battles
Yeah,
going on as we speak?
yeah, there's progress being made on a number of fronts. First of all, the Copyright Royalty Board uh, raised it and it got upheld in appeal, that there'll be a phased in 44% raise to publishers uh, for songs being streamed. And so that went up and will hopefully continue to go up in the future. There's also what is, you know, typically referred to as a value imbalance, where if a film licenses a song for use in a film, they typically pay the label the same amount for a master recording as the underlying composition. So if they were using Where Have All the Good Times Gone, by Van Halen, the film might pay $50,000 to Warner Records for the use of the Van Halen master and $50,000 to the publisher of the Kinks song. And the value imbalance has been that the labels got, I guess to their credit, maybe were smarter and got to the streaming services. And so originally it was something like the value ratio on a master was 11 times, I think, what the publisher got from a streaming service. And now it's creeping closer to 50-50, that the song is worth the same as what the master recording is worth. But, if I'm not mistaken, it might be 7-1 now. But, in a perfect world, it should be 1-1.
Yeah, I mean, I want to feel like I'm supporting the artist by at least playing a stream. I get artists want you to buy their music, but it's like the vehicles nowadays, there's not even a CD player that's in there. So I mean, it's like I don't even know if I wanted to buy something, where do I play? Like even I don't think on Spotify you even have the option of buying the song. I know Amazon will do that, but
Yeah.
it's just
Yeah, I bought the David Bowie Ziggy Stardust box. It was one of my most important albums in my history. And when I got to the penultimate disc in the set, it was a Blu-ray disc. And I'm saying, oh shit, I can't even
yeah,
play what I bought.
yeah.
And so I went into the other room, found a Blu-ray player that was dusty under the TV set, brought it into the music room, plugged it all in, got it all hooked up, and was able to listen to it. But
You shouldn't have to go out of your way to do that. Yeah. Now, what
it
about
took me 3 hours
you're
to play
right?
the damn thing.
God, I had a friend of mine just give me these great CDs of Doors recording at the Whiskey a Go Go and all that. I was like, oh, cool. And then I didn't even think to look in my vehicle, and I said, where's the CD? I'm like trying to put it in somewhere. It's not there. What about an artist who wants to record a cover of a song for an album? Do they have to pay? And does that apply to like if they're on tour and they want to play a song? I
Okay,
don't. I always thought in tour you could play whatever you want live.
there's two questions there. Uh, One is record it for a record or streaming, and the other is a venue. To record it on a record, as long as you're not changing the fundamental character of the song, anybody can record a song that has been voluntarily released. There are requirements for doing that, but that's called a statutory mechanical license. and the requirements specify, I think now you got to pay 12.1 cent a recording for each copy you distribute. So if you made 1,000 CDs of Where Have All the Good Times Gone, then you owe someone, I think it's $120 if I did the math right. So $121. So, as long as you serve notice that you are recording the song to the publisher and you make the requisite payments, anyone can record that song, even if you have no talent, as long as you're not changing the fundamental character of the song. It's a statutory mechanical rate. And it's a compulsory license. As long as they comply, you can't stop them. That's why the Sex Pistols were able to record My Way. You know, I think Paul Anka might have initially not been so keen on that idea. So as to venues, though, when you get to venues, you are not making a copy of it, you are publicly performing it. So as long as the venue has a valid performing rights license from the society representing the publisher, you're okay. So like in Tom Petty's case, if he's an ASCAP writer, if the venue has a license from ASCAP, anyone performing an ASCAP song in that venue is totally covered.
Wow. So it's the venue itself.
Yeah, because
Wow. Okay.
public performance is taking place in the venue. If it's not a venue per se, say someone sets up a stage on the beach, in Manhattan Beach and does a festival, then the promoter has to get a license for public performance, either from the band's publisher, the societies, ASCAP, BMI, CSAC, GMR.
Wow. Yeah. And all of this is covered in the book, The Plain and Simple Guide to Music Publishing, the fifth edition. And you do write it in a way that's easily accessible and it's entertaining to read because it is something it's important for musicians, songwriters to read, but it's also just for somebody like myself, just fascinated with this stuff. It's just a great read. So I really urge people to get this fifth edition because there are so many changes that you mentioned. AI recordings are now becoming a big thing too. There's another
Yeah.
one, right? So you got this album, this UK band used AI to imagine what Oasis might sound like if they were to reform and release a new album. So they put out this. They're called Breezer, I think, is the band, and they created their own tracks and added an AI version of Liam Gallagher's voice over the top. Is that legally okay to do?
It's only legally okay to do if you get permission to machine learn the copyrighted material that is being used to synthesize the voice. If you've gone to the Gallagher's label and the Gallagher's and gotten permission to train your AI with the real voice and with real songs and with real lyrics, if you had gotten that permission and worked out a deal with the copyright owners of the material ingested to learn, then it would be legal, but no one's doing that.
Wow. And this
Very few people are doing that.
they call it AISIS.
Yeah.
AISIS. Yeah. I mean, I just think, boy, if I'm a singer, I'm like, whoa, what are you doing? You're taking my voice and you're just going ahead and using it without asking me?
Yeah. I mean, you could also go ahead and look at Frito-Lay versus Tom Waits, and you could look at Bette Midler versus Ford Motor Company online. And that talks about both of those cases talk about tangential issues where those companies hired people who sounded like Bette Midler and people who sounded like Tom Waits without paying them. And in the days of prior to AI, it was a sound-alike person. Now it's a computer that's doing, the synthesis of what that person sounded like or wrote like or sang like. But those cases, the artists pretty much prevailed on you can't use someone that sounds like me if to mislead the public that I'm endorsing your products.
Yeah. And also radio stations' use of music in commercials is a big thing. The station I worked at used a Bruce Springsteen song to promote some local business, and somebody from, I don't know, somebody from Bruce's people or the label, whatever, just happened to live in the area and heard it. They got pissed
Yeah, we
and
get
pulled it.
we get emails and phone calls all the time from people saying, "Would Tom Petty ever approve a crappy T-shirt saying you belong amongst the wild flowers, for a nursery?" And we go after them.
Yeah.
We got to stop it to protect the name.
Wished.
Although we would have, we no longer represent Tom. So
Well, Don Henley is really, really aggressive when it comes to YouTube. Like if you go to YouTube and you look for an Eagles song or a Don Henley song, if it's not put up by him or his people, it comes down, which is the next question. Now, is it up to the person? Am I wrong? Is it not even Don? I don't know. I heard he hires a staff of people to go on YouTube and look, make sure it's all legit. Is it up to the person who owns the music to take their work down on YouTube?
it's up to the person or the person or company that owns the music, not necessarily the person who wrote it. So if the person who wrote it sold the song to a publisher, then it would be the publisher's decision as to whether to go after them. If the person who wrote the song, like Don Henley, kept it uh, and didn't sell it to someone, then that person is the publisher and go after someone. Henley and I are both mutual friends of Stan Lynch from Tom Petty's band, the original drummer.
One of my favorite drummers.
And he's great. He's absolutely great. And I'm in touch with him about once a week.
That's cool.
But we share stuff back and forth. Sometimes he'll say, "Henley liked what you did on this," and I'll say, "Hey, I like what Henley did on that." And we're both aware of each other's defense of songwriters and writers. And
Interesting. Stan Lynch, I just heard he's a songwriter too. He contributed a song to, I'm forgetting. He contributed a song for another artist. Anyway,
well, he's written for the Eagles, the Birds, the Mavericks.
okay.
I can't remember all the people he's written for. And he's also a record producer. He produced some tracks on some Eagles records. He has a studio, I think near Gainesville, Florida, where he lives now, and
Yeah.
he's recording bands.
What a style of just a fantastic drummer. I'm all of the albums he's on with Petty I love, and I love the albums after, but I loved he had that finesse, that style that just stands out.
Yeah, there's a very famous drummer who I won't mention, but he's probably one of the top 5 drummers of all time. And he has personally told me, he said, Stephen Ferrone, Tom's current drummer,
Right.
or final drummer,
Yep.
is a great drummer, but there's nothing that compares to the tracks that had Stan on them. Stan was trying to keep up for his dear life, but it just had a different sound. And I mean, I'm friends with Steven and I love what he's done.
Oh,
And
phenomenal job. Absolutely.
but if I had to pick one over the other, sorry, Steven, I'd pick Stan for Tom Petty's band.
Yeah. Most sampling requests from the rap, hip hop, and R&B worlds. You write, quote, when considering a sample request, it's important to obtain and review a transcription of the lyrics or rap in order to make an informed decision. Expand on that a little bit, how the cost can range depending on how much of the song is sampled. This is something I didn't know either.
Yeah, I mean, there's no flat rate. You can turn down a sample request if you don't like it. So if you are going to approve it, you get to decide how much of either the new work or how much they have to pay you, you will own. And when it comes down to it, you know, you usually get a demo recording if the person is talking about F this and F that and using the N word all over the place. And you had a delightful little love song about how much you loved your puppy, you might not want to approve it at all. On the other hand, they might come to you and say, hey, you know, this guy has 1 billion streams on his last album, and we'll pay you $100,000 guarantee up front to sample your little puppy song. You might say, okay, principle's out the window. I'll take the money.
I heard that the Beastie Boys' Paul's Boutique record, which was so far ahead of its time, and I love that album. I love Beastie Boys. There was so many samples on there, but that was at a time when they didn't ask for permission because it really the artist didn't think it was going to be such a moneymaker, and that after that things changed. Is that true? Do you know?
I would say in general what you're saying happened in a lot of different cases. People back then didn't bother to get permission, just like some of the streaming services didn't bother to get permission now. And they had to clean up messes after the fact to clear samples that they didn't get permission for up front. Now, I think in general for the major labels, the procedure is generally to get try and clear a sample before something is released. Recently we heard about Kanye and Ozzy Osbourne going at it because Kanye released something that the Osbourne said no to. They said, we don't want to be a part of your anti-Semitic rants. Sharon Osbourne being Jewish and being very concerned about the statements that Kanye was making. And I have nothing against Kanye or Sharon Osbourne. Just for the record, I'm just trying to repeat, what I've read. I imagine they're cleaning up that mess because they used it anyway. So,
yeah, 1989 was Paul's Boutique. I always want to say 87, but still 89 was like the early days of sampling, where soon after that it became a huge thing. And the story about Sting with Every Breath You Take, he's the sole songwriting credit on there, and Andy Summers is still recently said he's considering taking legal action, or is, but he makes so much money off of not just the song itself, but then when P. Diddy samples it and uses it, he's like, I could just make a living off of that alone, like just the publishing off of that.
That goes to my point. Don't sell your publishing. You're dealing with a professional handicapper. With respect to claims of authorship years after the fact, one of the factors that typically has to be overcome on something like that is a legal issue called latches. And latches means, hey, Andy Summer, you were in the pleas. You saw it came out when, with Sting's name on it and no other name, and you didn't do anything for 20, 30, 40 years. I don't know when it came out. You're barred from pursuing it because you ignored it for so long. And that's what latches is. So I imagine, and I'm not a lawyer, I'm not giving legal advice or analysis, but as a publisher, I think that, that would be one of the defenses that someone might make for a late in career claim to authorship.
Yeah, and there are a lot of famous stories. Like Zeppelin was always the talk, where a lot of people came after Zeppelin for the debate over whether they were stealing music or just it was inspiring their music. But the big one is Vanilla Ice's Queens Under Pressure. That whole thing. Vanilla Ice later claimed that he purchased the publishing rights to Under Pressure, saying that buying the song for $4 million made more financial sense than paying out royalties. But then a Queen spokesman said that statement's inaccurate. So you are the insider.
Know.
You don't know. Okay.
the general rule of thumb is when you have a really big hit record, a song that you've written, someone else is going to come out of the woodwork and say they wrote it. It's the nature of it. Well, that's similar to something that I wrote. And you're going to deal with that. It's a nuisance of making a lot of money on a hit record. And when I worked with the Offspring on Come Out and Play, this is all in public documents, we had 3 people come out of the woodwork and say they had written Come Out and Play and that they had, an infringement claim against the band. And, my approach was, fine, all 3 of you say you wrote it. Why don't you have an elimination round and whoever wins that can come and sue the band? It all sort of went away at that point.
There's another one. I just covered a book on the widows of famous rockers, and Ronnie Van Zant's widow, Judy, went through some legal battles with the members of Skynyrd over the use of, or just the continuation of the band. And that was another thing. It was like, sometimes it can get ugly and it's unfortunate. But Skynyrd is still going to this day without technically any original members, but we are in a different era now. I think the band names will continue long after the members that are in it, just because the people keep coming back. It makes them feel good to go out there and hear their songs that they grew up on.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what the band agreements say, inter-member agreements, who owns the name, who can tour as the Kingsmen, who can tour as Styx, who can tour as Journey. If Steve Perry's no longer in the group, they have to make an arrangement. If Steve was a member and original owner of the group named Journey, does he get a piece of the I don't know, but does he get a piece of the merchandise? Can they tour without him? Does he get a piece of the tour proceeds? Who knows? It depends on what's in a particular band agreement.
Yeah. Somebody who wrote a book on Journey recently said Steve and Neil Sean talk through lawyers these days. Yeah. Another well-known case. This is one, I think I get it, but if you could explain the John Fogerty getting sued for copying his own song. This was in '84. His old label Fantasy Inc. claimed that he copied his Creedence Clearwater Revival song Run Through the Jungle on his then hit Center Field. So Fogerty ultimately won the battle, but how can something like this even happen?
It can happen, and I believe the song in question was Zants Can't Dance.
Oh, was it Zants Can't Dance and not Center Field? Okay.
Yeah, well, it was the song.
Yeah.
And well, I could be wrong.
Or it could be, but either
regardless
way.
of what song it was, what happened, from my understanding, from a very high level overview, was that Fogerty wrote the songs, assigned them to the publishing entity owned by Fantasy Records, and thus Fantasy Records was the owner and controller of the song, not John Fogerty. And
we were both wrong, by the way. It's The Old Man Down the Road. I quickly just Googled.
Right. Okay. Yeah, well, Saul Zaentz did get pissed about the song Zants Can't Dance, and there may have been litigation over that.
Oh, yeah, that's right. He changed it to Vans Can't Dance or something. Yeah, he changed the title.
Right, yeah.
Right.
I believe my copy is one of the originals.
Right. But yeah,
but at any rate, it would just, now that Fantasy Records owned the song, if Michael Jackson came out and did a song that sounded just like one of the songs that Fantasy had acquired, they'd go after them. And they were treating Fogerty as a third party who copied a song that they owned. And, from my standpoint, John Fogerty, just a brilliant songwriter, had certain styles and idioms he used in many of his songs, and he can't stop being him. And it comes down to the question of, whether that was a fundamental way he wrote, or whether it was a true infringement of a work he had sold to someone else. And I don't know how it was ultimately resolved, but I'm sure the lawyers made a lot of money.
Yeah, there's so many I want to ask too. I just think of the Huey Lewis one, the Ghostbusters song. That was another one. But I'll finish with one last question to a songwriter listening right now who's just starting out. What is the most important piece of advice that you would give?
This is a very subjective piece of advice, but my advice would be learn how to play an instrument, uh, practice it well, learn about musical theory, learn about writing lyrics, read poetry, read lyrics. Um, don't rely on the tools that are available to make it very possible to do very little, like sampling stuff or getting someone to create a beat for you or, you know, become an artist, a writer, a creator. Don't use the AI. Don't go to, you know, uh, one of these bots and say, write lyrics about this and that and four verses. Don't do that. Learn how to do it. You will write a better song. You will be able to create a better melody. And my belief is that good songs come out of a lot of hard work. I mean, look at Leonard Cohen with 1,000 verses of Hallelujah before he said it was kind of close to done. Uh, talk to Don Henley again about how long it takes him to finish something. But hi, Don. Um, but that would be my advice. And then not only creating good songs, that's half the battle, but then you got to get someone, either yourself or someone else, to be able to get it out there and record it. You can have the best song in the world, and if you can't get it to somebody or it never gets recorded, then it's still in a drawer on a hard disk.
Yeah, yeah. And they should read your book too, The Plain and Simple Guide to Music Publishing.
Of
And
course,
it's
of course.
that's like Tom Petty said, man, if that book was out back then, it's out in a new, brand new, updated fifth edition. You can find it where books are sold. And Rita, where can people find you online?
I don't have much of an online presence. You can go to wixenmusic.com or wixenmusic.co.uk, depending on whether you're here or Europe, and you can track down the company.
All right. Well, we'll put the links to those sites on the show notes page. Randall, thank you so much. This was a fascinating conversation. I learned so much.
Yeah, and everything that I've said here is personal opinion. I might be willing to go back on things or refine them. I've been in situations before where I've done interviews where people have brought it up in law cases and depositions and said, but you said this in your book or you said that in an interview. So I revised the right to change anything, and everything that I've said is either public knowledge or spoken with the uh, consent of people who have said I could share these stories.
Noted and well said. Thanks,
Um,
Randall.
okay, thanks.